Now I'm going to tell you about survival secrets you never even knew existed. In the Middle Ages, houses didn't have central heating or the usual fireplaces in every room, but people knew how to create warmth where it seemed impossible. They hid the heat in the walls, kept it in the floor, and gathered it bit by bit in the very layout of the house. They used simple things as if they were levers of a complex system, and this system worked. Their solutions were hidden in thick clay, heavy curtains, and clever passageways that seem random, but were thought out to the smallest detail. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how houses were heated without fireplaces, and why these techniques can still be replicated in a regular apartment. What if everything you were taught about medieval houses is outdated? Imagine a house where heat cannot be seen or heard. It flows under your feet, quietly, without smoke or smell. People laid thick layers of clay and stone on the floors and built narrow channels under the flooring through which hot air from a separate hearth was passed. No pipes in the rooms, no flames in the middle of the hall, just a warm floor that did not burn, but evenly heated the space. Such a house breathed warmth, and its walls retained heat longer than seemed possible. These channels were made short and simple, so that the air would not have time to cool down. They led to the very center of the house, where families gathered in the evening, and the heat did not escape into the night, but was retained in the stone and clay. The low ceiling enhanced the effect. The hot air did not rise high, but remained close to the people. Chips were inserted into the cracks and coated with clay to prevent cold air from being sucked in from below. This way, the heat was no longer lost to the wind, but worked for the house. The walls were made thick, not for showy strength, but for inertia. The heat slowly entered the stone and slowly left it, so the house did not cool down immediately. If the floor and lower parts of the walls were heated during the day, it was possible to sit in the evening by dim light without feeling cold. The clay coating acted as a silent battery. It absorbed excess heat and released it when it became dark and damp. Thus, the house lived at its own pace, rather than at the pace of the weather.
And the flow from here...
The openings were made narrow so that a layer of warm air would form inside. Interior doors were placed closer to the corners, rather than in the center, so that the passageway would not cut off the warm spot in the room. At night, the gaps under the doors were plugged with cloth stuffed with dry grass, and the hot air stopped escaping into the hallway. There were no drafts in the house, but there was an even, calm warmth. It seemed quieter than any stove and more reliable than any fire. The interior partitions did not simply divide the space, they directed the heat. People understood that air moves according to its own rules, and they laid out the passageways so that the warm flow would turn to where they slept and ate. Even a small step at the threshold could stop the cold that rushed across the floor. The heat stayed where it was needed most. The upper parts of the walls, the coldest place in winter, were curtained with fabric, and a gap was left behind the fabric. In this gap, the air rose and cooled more slowly, creating a soft screen. No magic, just the right route for the air and a little dense fabric. The room was filled with warmth without a visible source. The secret was to heat the house, not the air. Air always escapes. It cannot be retained, it can only be directed. A house can be retained, so they heated the house. The floor, the bottom of the walls, the interior volume of the furniture, the heavy beams. When the flesh of the house is warm, the air is no longer important. It becomes only a means to an end, not the end itself. This approach seems strange. How can you heat stone instead of yourself? But it was the stone that helped people survive until morning without fire and smoke in the room. That is why people valued thick walls and heavy floors so much. They were not a burden, but a quiet source of heat. Stone did not fail and did not go out at the first gust of wind. Now here's a question for you. If you were offered heating without fire, only through the floor and walls, would you be willing to try it? Write in the comments how you feel about the idea of invisible heat in an old house. Your opinion is very important to us, and we read every comment. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. There are even more unexpected discoveries from past centuries ahead.
Imagine the comfort.
It sounds like...
Are you ready for the shocking truth? Most old houses were heated not by fire, but by root. The heat in them was not kindled. It was directed. Cold cannot be defeated by force, but it can be confused. Sent on a long journey, made to get lost in passageways, hit a wall, and lose speed. The house was not a fortress, but a maze for the wind. Where modern people put a radiator, old craftsmen built a trajectory. The first rule was to delay the gust at the entrance. Cold always comes from outside sharply and noisily. To soften this blow, the entrance to the house was not arranged directly into the living area, but through an intermediate compartment, a breathing space. The vestibule was like the lungs of the house. It took in the first cold, mixed it with the remains of warm air, and only then let it pass on. Snow settled at the threshold, the wind died down under the ceiling, and the heat, as if frightened, hid under the table. Inside, the house was divided into small spaces. This was not for the sake of cramped quarters, but for the sake of climate stability. The narrow corridor, low ceiling, and slightly shifted door were not accidental, but part of a system. The air passing through narrow spaces lost speed and did not cool down immediately. Even one extra turn saved 10 minutes of warmth. Large halls were reserved for holidays because they lost heat quickly. On ordinary days, life gathered in small rooms where the air knew its boundaries.
It is freezing outside.
The displacement of the doors was a simple and ingenious technique. If two doors stand directly opposite each other, the house turns into a pipe. The draft flies through, leaving not a single degree behind. It was enough to move one of them just half a meter, and the flow would break against the wall. The air would spill out, lose its force, and leave the warmth in the corner by the bench. This created quiet pockets, places where you could sit without a draft,
Feels better.
where cooled tea cooled more slowly than by the window. Even the narrow gap under the door was important. It allowed for a steady exchange rather than a breakthrough. The windows were made small and deeply set. The thick slope became not just a wall, but a chamber where the air had time to warm up. The inner slopes were smeared with clay, sometimes covered with fabric so that there would be no drafts along the seams. At night, the shutters were closed tightly, and soft fabric or bundles of dry moss were laid between them and the frame. This was done not for beauty, but for peace. The room breathed its own air, and by morning the glass was covered with frost, as if to remind us that the warmth remained inside. Even the location of the hearth was determined by the path of heat. In the corner, closer to the center of the house, it allowed the walls to warm up evenly. The flames reflecting off the clay spread in soft waves. The air under the ceiling gathered in a warm dome and then slowly descended along the walls. That is why the ceilings were not made too high. The higher they were, the more heat was lost uselessly. The stairs leading to the attic were hidden in a corner and made steep. This was not to save space, but because of air drafts. Climbing a steep staircase slowed down the upward flow. The railings and walls were made solid so that warm air would not escape upwards. Sometimes a box was placed under the steps to store jugs of hot water or dry shoes. In this way, the staircase became not just a passageway, but a quiet heat reservoir. Beds were placed against the inner wall, where there was no draft from the window. Sleeping next to cold glass is like sleeping on the border. To create a separate climate, a fabric canopy was attached above the bed. It turned the bed into a small room within a room. The air inside was warmed by breath, and people slept in their own microclimate. In the morning, the canopy smelled not of smoke, but of tranquility. This is not a luxury, it is a tool for survival. Heavy furniture worked like a hidden engineer. Chests, benches, and wardrobes not only took up space, they created mass that slowly warmed up and retained heat. The air near the floor, usually cold, was trapped in these pockets. It was always warmer near the furniture, and people knew these areas by touch. Knees, palms, and shoulders could feel where the warmth was and where there was emptiness. Even the shelves above the doors made sense. The hottest air collects under the ceiling, and you don't want to lose it. The shelf broke the flow, directing it back to the center of the room. Sometimes dried herbs or bread were stored on such shelves. Not because it was convenient, but because there was soft, stable heat there. Every centimeter of space was calculated, verified by centuries of observation. Partitions were not placed where they were convenient for the eye, but where they were more convenient for the air. Each wall hid a micro-vortex behind it, which kept the temperature steady. Even the chimney might not be in the center, but slightly offset so that the flow did not rush directly. In old houses, everything was built around the idea of movement, not of people, but of heat. Even the subfloor was used as a regulator. If it was filled with straw or dry sand, the floor did not freeze. If the basement was empty, the cold would rise faster. Therefore, they kept brushwood, tools, bundles of onions, anything that would trap air. There. The house was heated not by the stove, but by its own structure. All these solutions were born not from calculations, but from observations. People did not build diagrams. They lived in the house until it began to give them clues. They saw where the steam from their breath went, listened to where the door creaked, felt with their palms where the floor was colder. The cold taught people to think in terms of roots. Warmth was not a state, but a movement, and every detail obeyed this movement. Thus, the house became not just a shelter, but an extension of the body. It helped to survive, not with fervor, but with reason. Now, here's a question for you. Which technique seems most effective today? A vestibule at the entrance, a canopy over the bed, offset doors, or perhaps heavy furniture that acts as a stone accumulator? Write in the comments which method you prefer. And in the next chapter, you will see something you may never have seen before. A time machine, a room that maintains its temperature even when the fire has gone out. What I'm about to show you could be called forbidden warmth. Not because it is dangerous, but because it is too clever for its own good. In old houses, there was a trick that at first glance seemed excessive, almost a joke. The box bed. It was not just furniture, but a heat preservation system, enclosed on all sides by wooden walls and small doors. Inside, people breathed their own air, warming the space with their breath and bodies, turning a few cubic meters into a personal microclimate. Outside, a blizzard could rage and the wind could howl, but inside it was quiet, dry, and warm. No smoke, no sparks, just steady breathing and heat that was not wasted. The box bed usually stood in the corner, next to the stove, but not too close, so that the wood would not dry out. The space between them became a warm layer, like a pillow between the body and the heat. The walls inside the box were lined with fabric so that the wood would not give off cold and would not ring when touched. Sometimes a small window was added, not for light, but for breathing. Everything was thought out, how the air enters, how it exits, how it moves. It was not a box, but a thermal chamber, created without science, but with ingenious intuition. Heavy curtains were added to the box, thick, woolen, sometimes double. They were lowered at night, creating an invisible wall between the fabric and the air. This technique was used not only for beds, curtains also covered doorways and corners where the wind blew. Thus, the fabric ceased to be a decoration and became part of the architecture. Even the color was not chosen at random. Dark so as not to collect dust and to better retain heat. The carpets on the walls served the same purpose. Not luxury, but physics. A cold wall resonates. Its surface echoes its own coldness, reflecting breath, rustling, footsteps. A little air remained between the carpet and the wall, and this air became a soft insulator. Even thin fabric changed the climate. A hand resting against the wall no longer shivered. The floor was also part of this system. It was never left bare. First, a wooden floor was laid, under which a dry mixture of sand, ash, and fine straw was sprinkled. It removed the icy breath of the earth. On top of the floorboards were rugs, mats, and felt. Even their arrangement had a certain order. Thick ones near the door, where people walked more often and where the air was colder. Soft and thick ones closer to the bed. It seemed like a small thing, but it determined the comfort of the first few minutes after entering. Your feet stopped freezing before you even had time to take off your shoes. Before going to bed, they used little tricks. An hour before going to bed, they placed vessels with hot water in the bed, jugs or stone hot water bottles wrapped in cloth. During this time, the wooden bed absorbed some of the heat, and when a person lay down, the cold no longer bit. Sometimes, instead of water, they used hot stones from the hearth. They were placed in an iron tray or wrapped in coarse canvas and hidden under the bench or at the foot of the bed. The stone gave off heat slowly, without fire, without light, and almost without smell. By morning, it was still warm and could be used to warm the hands. Small tricks produced big results. A night without waking up from the cold. The box itself breathed according to its own laws. The doors were never closed tightly. A gap the thickness of a finger was left between the boards, more often at the top than at the bottom. This provided microventilation. Fresh air slowly entered without removing the warm air inside. Inside, people did not suffocate but breathed calmly, and the outside cold had no chance of getting inside. This balance was maintained for years, without thermometers, but with a precision that an engineer today would envy. A small niche for a candle was often arranged next to the bed. The candle was lit not for light, but for warmth. One candle in an insulated space could raise the temperature by several degrees. In 5 minutes, the air under the curtain was no longer icy. From the outside, it looked as if a person was living in a box, but inside it was cozier than in a spacious living room. A little warmth, if left undisturbed, can overcome great cold. Even the sounds changed in such a place. The box absorbed noise, and the night became as silent as under snow. Every sigh seemed louder, and every breath warmer. This space was created not only for sleep, but also for silence. Inside, you could hear the wood crackling and the house breathing. Smaller boxes were made for children, real nests. They were placed closer to the stove, and the door was left open. There the child slept, surrounded by warmth on all sides, without drafts or dampness. The elderly, on the contrary, chose boxes with thick walls where the heat lasted longer. The house was adapted to age. In some places, the box bed was turned into a whole module. Boxes with things at the bottom, a platform at the top, and a bench on the side. Thus, one item combined storage, sleep, and heating. You could live in it for weeks, almost without going outside. It was not poverty, it was rationality. This method of heating did not require fire, but it did require respect for the air. The house was not heated, it was negotiated with. Every piece of fabric, every board, every curtain was part of the agreement between man and cold. Today, in an age of open spaces and high ceilings, a box bed seems strange. But try spending one night in a small, warm space, and you will understand that comfort is not in square meters, but in the density of heat around the body. Old houses knew this. They gave everyone their own personal cube of silence, where you breathe on your own and warm your own air. This is what a real heat machine looked like. Simple, without fuel, without technology. And if it were patented today, it would probably be banned in 12 countries. Too effective, too simple, too human. And then there is a topic that many avoid, even though it was what made old houses alive: walls that heated themselves without a fireplace or stove. In the next chapter, you will learn how they did it and why we stopped believing in it. Are you ready to learn the truth about walls that heat? A thick wall is not a mason's whim, but a slow heat accumulator. It cannot be heated quickly, but once heated, you will not lose everything in an hour. People took advantage of this property by making niches and shelves in the interior wall. They placed warm vessels on them, and the heat went into the stone, only to return at night. The invisible heat reserve worked when the fire had already gone out. Double surfaces are another trick. Inside the room, they installed additional wooden paneling with a palm-width gap. The air between the wood and the stone warmed slowly and evenly, forming a soft screen. The wall stopped pulling, and the cold stone no longer stole heat from the skin. The house became calmer and quieter. Arches and semi-arches under the ceiling were not made for beauty. Warm air was trapped in them, not escaping through the cracks. The thermal dome was stored at the ceilings, and the temperature became more even below. It was a bag for heat sewn to the ceiling. The smooth clay plaster worked like a pot lid. It slowed down the heat transfer. This created the feeling that the room was warm, even if the thermometer showed a low temperature. Niches for vessels are the simplest and most reliable solution. During the day, clay jugs with hot water were placed there, and at night, gentle warmth emanated from the niche. In the morning, the water was warm enough for washing, and the wall was not so eager to absorb your heat. The ceilings were made low, not to save wood. The lower the ceiling, the less volume there was to heat. A difference of a palm's width made a difference in sensation of a whole degree. When the cold pressed in from outside, that palm's width became a lifeline. The inner corners were reinforced with wooden inserts. Wood warmed up faster than stone and removed the icy corner. A bench was placed there, and this spot became a favorite. No miracles, just the right material in the right place. Stone shelves under the ceiling held jugs of warm water, and it was warmer under them. The heat rose to the shelf, lingered, and gradually descended. All these techniques boiled down to one principle. Heat loves a place. Give it somewhere to linger, and it will stay with you. Take away its support, and it will go away. A simple law that they knew and held in their hands every winter. Here's a basic question for you. If you had to leave only one solution in the room, what would it be? A double wall, a low ceiling, or a niche with warm water? In the next chapter, you'll learn how they kept the heat where there was no fire at all, and why fabric and wood work just as well as any flame. Things in the house were not just utensils. They became living shields against the cold, participants in the winter agreement between man and space. Everything knew its place and its duty. Heavy curtains not only covered the windows, but also formed soft walls, separating warm air from cold. The curtain at the door was especially important. Thick fabric hung on a rope, falling with a slight overlap, covering the gaps and softening the flow of air. When the door opened, the curtain swayed but did not let the cold rush past the threshold. The house did not lose its breath. At night, a thick fabric roll, sometimes stuffed with sand or dry moss, was placed under the door. It was called by different names: roll, slider, guard. It prevented air from moving across the floor, where the cold was particularly persistent. By morning, if the cushion was still in place, the floor remained warm, and the morning air was soft rather than prickly. These simple, quiet actions saved the most precious minutes. Before dawn, when the house cools down the fastest. The bed was prepared in advance, with the kind of attention that today would be given to a car. A bottle warmer was placed in the bed, ceramic or metal, filled with hot water and wrapped in cloth. It was placed at the foot of the bed to warm the boards and bedding first, rather than the body. In a quarter of an hour, the wood of the bed absorbed the gentle heat, and the person no longer sank into the cold wood. Sometimes the hot water bottle was replaced with a heated brick, stone, or bag of grain. It all depended on what was at hand. A thick canopy often hung over the bed, a fabric dome that preserved the breath. The air inside it remained alive and even. In the morning, when the curtain was lifted, soft steam came out from under it, like a sigh, a sign that the night had passed correctly. Things took in the warmth and returned it without a word. Each item had its own route. A hot bowl taken off the stove was first placed on a bench, then on a shelf, and then by morning it cooled on the windowsill. This path was not chaotic but rhythmic. Things circulated like air, helping the house breathe. Floor mats were laid out in layers. The bottom layer, rough, dense, sometimes made of old burlap, absorbed the cold from the boards. The second layer, softer, made of felt or fabric, retained heat. The third top layer was thin so as not to interfere with walking. Each layer had a purpose. The bottom layer caught the cold, the middle layer held it, and the top layer absorbed the warmth of the feet. In passageways where footsteps were frequent, the rugs were made thick so that they would not slip or tear. Near the bed, they were soft because bare feet touched the ground there. Even the fabric pattern was chosen not for beauty, but for density. A coarse weave holds air better. The floor was not just a foundation, it was a horizon of warmth. Warm floors were not made, they were created. Between the floorboards and the ground lay a layer of ash, sand, and dry grass. This layer acted as a filter. It kept out moisture and retained heat. Sometimes sheep's wool or tow was placed under the boards. Anything that absorbed air became an aid. Therefore, people walked around the house barefoot or in soft stockings. Not for comfort, but so as not to disturb the accumulated heat. The interior shelves were made deep, almost like niches. Warm items were stored there overnight. Vessels, bread, clothes, stones from the stove. During the night, the wood of the shelves warmed up and became a source of gentle heat itself. In the morning, a bowl of water was placed there so that it would not cool down, or people would warm their hands by leaning on the heated board. The shelf seemed to remember the touch of the evening and give it back. The upper shelves, under the ceiling, were used to store things that needed to stay dry and warm. Dried herbs, grains, feathers, and fabric. The air under the ceiling is always warmer, and these things lived in the mild climate created by the house. You could also hide your socks or mittens there for the morning. They were dry and slightly warm, as if someone had been holding them in their hands. The house breathed through objects. It did not heat the air. It heated objects, and objects heated the air. In the evening, when people went to bed, the house continued to work. Fabrics cooled slowly. Wood generously gave off its accumulated heat, and air circulated through the curtains like a filter. And the morning came not with an icy bite, but with a quiet warmth, as if the house itself had spent the night on guard. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret, one that was passed down not by words, but by the habit of hands. How to get heat without flame. The secret is to heat things, not air. Air disappears, but objects remain. Air always seeks a way out, but clay, fabric, and stone hold heat quietly, without fuss. In old houses, they knew this. Heat objects, and they will heat you. The simplest means is stones. They were placed in the hearth or in the coals, heated until they began to sing from the heat, then taken out with a poker and wrapped in thick fabric, old cloth, a piece of felt, an old fur coat. If you put it in a wooden box by the bed and closed the lid, the heat did not escape, but slowly flowed into the wood. The room did not become hot, but the sharpness of the cold air disappeared. Some houses used portable braziers, but not for fire near them, but for heating the same stones, jugs, and water. The fire itself remained in a safe place, in the stove, in a separate room, in the yard under a canopy. When the objects heated up, they were brought to where people slept and worked. It was like delivering heat without smoke. The heated objects worked slowly, with constant power without carbon monoxide. They were placed under the table, at the feet, under the bench, on the shelf with clothes. They did not shine, did not make noise, but made the night bearable. People knew, you don't need to heat the air, you need to heat the environment. Then the air will become warm on its own. This method was safer and more economical. In a cramped room, it was impossible to keep the heat open. It consumed oxygen and dried up the air. But heated stones, water, or clay did not interfere with the air. People slept peacefully without fear of sparks or suffocation. It was a culture of quiet warmth, not ostentatious but functional. The floor under the table was often made special. Slightly raised decking, heat-absorbing objects were placed under it. Bricks, stones, pieces of clay, vessels with water. Anything that could absorb heat became a heat reserve for the evening. The inner drawers and boxes of beds and benches were used as heat accumulators. Everything that could store heat for a long time was placed there in advance. Ceramic jugs, thick felt rolls, bundles of fabric, and rolls of wool. They were heated near the hearth, then placed in these heat nests and covered with a lid. When a cold evening came, the lid was opened slightly, and warm air began to slowly escape, like breath. Even ordinary water could be a source of gentle heat. Water was heated in small jugs or bottles by the stove, then wrapped in cloth and placed at the foot of the bed. The water cooled slowly and evenly, without burning oxygen. By morning, it was still slightly warm, and the cloth was dry. Such warmers were passed from hand to hand, sometimes reused for washing. The heat did not disappear, but changed from one form to another. The air in the house was ventilated not by drafts, but through a narrow upper slit or a small window under the ceiling. This allowed moisture and light smoke from the hearth to escape, but the heat remained. If you opened the window wide, the heat would escape in a minute. If you lifted the sash just a little, only the dampness would escape. Sometimes houses had heat corners, enclosed areas where all heated items were collected: stones, fabric, dishes, and water vessels. Things that had been heated during the day were stored there and used as needed at night. It was a quiet storehouse of heat, a kind of reserve. People went there to warm themselves not with flames, but with air that was already saturated with the heat of objects. All this is not magic or trickery, but simple physics that could be felt with the hands. In the old house, everything worked according to the law of moderation. Do not overheat, do not dry out, do not waste. Heat was not extracted, it was conserved. The main question remains the same. What should be heated? Stones, water, or the house itself? Each method has its own characteristics. Stone provides long-lasting heat, water is easy to renew, and a house, if properly constructed, becomes a source of heat itself. In the next chapter, I will show how the architecture of entire settlements help people endure weeks of piercing winds and frosty mornings. The street is the first thing that steals heat. Not walls, not windows, but the street. Long, open, cold. It leads the wind straight to the doors, if allowed. That is why old settlements learned to talk to the wind, not argue with it. Plans were drawn up not with a ruler, but according to the windrows. First, they looked at where the wind blew most often, and then they turned the houses so that the facades did not catch the blow, but extinguished it. Each house became a shield for its neighbor, and the settlement turned into a system of barriers. Narrow passages worked better than wide streets. The airflow could not accelerate, broke against the walls, swirled, and lost its force. Even small turns in the streets, seemingly random, were part of the defense. The wind did not like zigzags. Thus, architecture became a tool for survival. Along such streets, the snow fell evenly, did not pile up in drifts, and the sound of the wind was muffled, as if behind a wall. Houses were built not for symmetry, but for warmth. One house covered another, and even if it looked cramped, it was quieter inside. Buildings without windows and with solid walls were built on the north side, and windows were placed where there was less draft, on the south or southeast side, where the sun rises earlier. The wall facing the wind acted as armor. It was made thicker, without protrusions, with few gaps. Sometimes it was even covered with an additional layer of clay or stone to reduce vibration from the wind. The courtyards were made deep and enclosed like nests. It was always quieter in the courtyard than on the street, and the air there was milder. Even without a stove, the courtyard retained its own heat, not because it warmed it, but because it did not let it escape. Snow melted more slowly in courtyards, but it did not turn to ice. The wind had no momentum, and the cold lost its bite. People felt this with their bodies. As soon as they stepped out of the courtyard onto the street, the air became harsh. If the house was located in a drafty place, a vestibule was always built at the entrance. This was not a luxury or an extension for dirt, but a strategic point of warmth. The vestibule broke the airflow, cutting off the draft from the room. Sometimes a gap the width of a step was left between the outer and inner doors, just enough for a person to enter, close one door, and only then open the other. In winter, it was a small airlock between the outside world and the warmth inside. Even if it was -20 outside, the air inside remained stable. Even the streets between neighborhoods could be designed as wind traps. They were narrowed at the exits, turned, and lined with rows of shrubs. Shrubs are not decoration, but flow dampers. The houses themselves, standing closer to the edge of the settlement, often had a special role. They took the first blow of the wind and were called windy. They were built stronger and placed with their blind side facing outwards to protect the rest. It was also warmer inside such houses because the neighboring buildings reflected part of the wind back. This is how collective protection was formed. The settlement warmed itself without extra fuel. People didn't just live next to each other. They warmed each other with space. The house in the street, the yard in the shed, the wall in the bush. Everything was connected into a single fabric where heat moved slowly, like breath. And so the warm town was not a metaphor, but a fact. It kept the degrees in every corner. It tricked the frost, forcing it to get lost between the houses. Looking down from above, it looked like random construction. But if you live there through the winter, you understand. Every bend, every opening, and every crack is the result of observation. Now here's a question for you. Which is stronger, a stove inside a house or the right wind outside? In the next chapter, we'll look at how settlements combine the warmth of the earth and the warmth of the air to survive without unnecessary fire. Clay and stone absorbed heat slowly, but gave it back reliably. They were mixed so that the surface would not crack and would retain moisture for a long time without becoming damp. A layer of compacted clay was laid on the floor, then a board, and the result was a floor that did not feel cold. This is how they built in places where winter was longer than autumn. Wood absorbed heat quickly and was placed in corners, near beds, and in partitions. It removed sharp edges in places where people touched it with their bodies. Interior surfaces were often left wooden, and stone was hidden behind a wooden wall. The house was a combination of materials, and winter could not defeat it in one fell swoop. Insulation was simple: dry grass, tow, fabric. They were used to fill gaps, not for airtightness, but to tame the wind. The wind will find its way anyway, but it must lose speed. That is the whole logic of an old house. Heat is not only walls and fire, but also time. It lives in order, in a sequence of actions, in the ability not to rush and not to forget. During the day, they warmed up what would be needed at night: the bench by the wall, the stone under the floor, the vessels with water, the bed, the clothes, even the air under the canopy. They heated not for comfort, but for the certainty that the night would not begin with cold. Night for the house was like breathing in a slow rhythm. Everything slowed down but did not stop. The cloth cooled, the stones gave off heat, the air moved almost imperceptibly. The house held on to what it had accumulated while people slept. A warm house is not one that is hot, but one that does not get cold. The morning began with a walk around the house, almost like a check before a trip. First one, the cracks and seals. Where the track had slipped, it was fixed, because one empty space could let cold air under the entire floor. The walls were examined with the palm of the hand. The heating system worked as long as it was monitored and broke down when it was forgotten. These little things made a whole world of difference in terms of feeling, between a house where the heat escapes and a house where it stays. People who had lived through many winters knew the value of a minute and a crack. Warmth was not a gift. It was earned through attention. And those who knew how to notice the little things never felt cold. None of this was born on paper or in workshop drawings. This knowledge came from experience, from hundreds of winters, from thousands of evenings, when it was not a beautiful word that mattered, but a warm place. People learned from their own mistakes, from frozen walls, from failed stoves, and from cracks that were more memorable than any advice. One family found its own way to weather the storm, changing the order, putting up a partition, coming up with a new harness. Another watched, repeated, added its own touches. A third corrected a small detail, and the house became quieter, drier, warmer. The house was not built of bricks and boards, but of small victories over the cold. Each thing knew its purpose and did not confuse it with another's. The vestibule and curtain, the box bed and niche for hot water, the flooring underfoot, the cushion at the door, the heavy fabric on the wall. All this came together in a coherent system where nothing was superfluous. There was no luxury here, but there was precision. Everything that was done had meaning. The fabric held the air, the wood held the heat, the earth held the memory. People did not strive for beauty, but for stability. And this stability became their comfort. The walls remembered summer, not metaphorically, but literally. Their bodies retained the dry heat accumulated over months of sunshine. The floor retained traces of the evening heat, the flooring, the warmth of feet, the fabric, the breath of people. And so the old dwelling seemed quiet, but within that quietness, a whole system was at work. The wind broke against the walls, smoke warmed the ceiling, fabric dampened the draft. Stone remembered the palm of the hand. All together, this created an order that was stronger than fire. Which of the old tricks seem most practical to you? A box bed, heavy curtains, warm niches in the walls, or invisible, warm floors? Write in the comments what you would try at home and what topics about life in the Middle Ages you would like to see next. Subscribe to the channel. There are many more clear, calm, and useful stories ahead about how people learn to live warmer without unnecessary words and large fires.